famous and prominent Americans have been Freemasons. Franklin Roosevelt, Hugo Black, Harry Truman, Lyndon Johnson, Gerald Ford, just to name a few. However, the Catholic Church has consistently condemned Freemasonry from 1738 until 1960. In fact, on May 14, 1829, Pope Pius VIII, in his encyclical Traditi Humilitate, condemned Masonry as follows, quote, "Their law is untruth, their God is the devil, and their cult is turpitude." I'm Julius Smetona. This is what Catholics believe. Joining with me to discuss Freemasonry is Mr. Paul Fisher. Mr. Fisher is a graduate of Notre Dame University. He subsequently attended the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. He served in an intelligence capacity with the U.S. Army both in World War II and during the Korean War, and he served in security for a number of governmental organizations, including the National Association, the NASA, and finally he was the congressional aide for Congressman Jim Delaney for 8 years. Mr. Fisher is also the author of the book Behind the Lodge Door, as well as Their God is the Devil. Also with me is Father Clarence Kelly. Father Clarence Kelly is Superior of the Society of St. Pius V. In addition, he is the spiritual director of St. Joseph's Novitiate, a congregation of traditional Catholic sisters in Round Top, New York. Father Kelly also has written a book in which the question of Masonry is discussed at length, Conspiracy Against God and Man. Mr. Fisher, welcome to What Catholics Believe.
Thank you very much. Nice being here.
Mr. Fisher, I have a question. You know, when one hears this condemnation of Masonry in such strong and to our ears almost fanatical language, it seems almost incongruous when I think the public perception of Masons are people who support and promote hospitals for crippled children. They promote very benevolent and social functions and the circus and so on and so forth. You read this seems almost crazy.
Well, I hope it isn't fanatical. I think everything's backed up by documents largely from Masons themselves. It is true that the average Mason, the great majority of Masons, don't know what Freemasonry is all about. In fact, the grand philosopher of Freemasonry, Albert Pike, right, said that the blue degrees, that's the first 3 degrees of Masonry, think they know what Masonry is, but they don't. Real knowledge of Masonry only comes to the princes of Masonry, which you get up to the 30th degree and above. So the average guy thinks it's, in fact, I believed that it was nice. I saw a nice parade they had, and I said, I don't care what the church says about it. I knew vaguely what it was, and the church opposed it. I said, these men are bringing a lot of happiness to all these children. Later I found out that that's a scam. The hospitals and the parades are just to lure men in because people want to be identified with an organization that does so many good things, but they don't know what they're joining.
Why is there antagonism then? Why does the church condemn Freemasonry? What does it find offensive or objectionable in it?
Well, the church attacked Freemasonry within 25 years after it was founded because of its naturalism. And naturalism is that the only reality is nature. There is no God in the sky or in heaven or whatever. And one of the grand secrets of Masonry is that man himself is God. Man is the great architect who will change the world.
Is it true to say that Masonry is actually a religious system, a system of belief?
Oh, absolutely. They have everything the Catholic Church has. They have baptisms, they have funerals, they have what they call sacraments, they have rituals, and they admit to being the successors, the modern-day successors to the pagan ancient mysteries. It is a religion.
I was told by an IRS agent that they have the status of a church as far as federal exemption goes. They are recognized as a church.
Father Kelly, my understanding is that if you look through the consistent papal encyclicals dealing with Freemasonry, there's 4 reasons why the church condemns them. The oaths they take, the secrecy, the religious indifferentism, meaning one religion is as good as the other, in fact theirs might even be better, and then there's subversion against the church and state. What's wrong with the oaths they take, the Masons take?
They take an oath of blind obedience so that they commit themselves to following the orders of their superiors. Now, again, as Mr. Fisher said, the overwhelming majority of Blue Lodge Masons are really not aware of what's going on, but if you get into the inner circles, they submit themselves heart and soul, at least that's the idea, to the commands of their superiors. And that type of blind obedience is potentially very dangerous. It could be a license for the commission of any crime. But Pope Leo XIII, who wrote a wonderful encyclical on Freemasonry, he put it into a very big context. He said that from the beginning of time, there's been a war between the forces of good and the forces of evil, between what St. Augustine called the city of God and the city of man. And that the leader, the ruler, the force behind the city of man is Satan, and the force behind the city of God, of course, is our Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God and the Savior of the world. And he says in there that in our times, the forces of hell, the forces of Satan, have organized in a most extraordinary way, and that this is essentially the role of Freemasonry, to take up this grand cause against God and against his holy church, and to establish, in effect, a new world order which is based upon pure naturalism.
Mr. Fisher, could you give me one concrete example of Masonic hostility to the Catholic Church?
Oh, they admit through the years that they're hostile to the Church, particularly in Europe. And a lot of people think the European Masonry is different than Masonry in the United States. Well, in Europe, they were fighting the Roman Catholic Church as such. That was Christianity largely in Europe that they opposed. But in the United States, they have been behind the Know Nothing movement. It's documented in my book. The Know Nothing movement, the APA movement,
what is the APA movement?
APA was it had two titles. One was American Protestant Association was one title. The other was the American Protective Association, which means protect the country from Catholics. And the Ku Klux Klan, all the leaders of the Ku Klux Klan, the top leaders were Masons, and only Masons could be what they call Klegals, that is, go out and solicit for membership in it. While we hear a lot about the Klan, this is the Klan from 1921 forwards for 1928, that it was anti-black. The Klan at the Civil War very definitely was, but the Klan in 1921 forward, the mother lode for the antipathy and the tremendous joining of people all over the country in places like Connecticut and Massachusetts and New York and some where there weren't a lot of blacks at the time, is the Catholic Church, hatred of the Catholic Church. And there was little hatred of Jews in the Klan. The whole focus was against the Catholic Church. And the Klan went under for two reasons. One reason was that the state of New York passed legislation after court opinion that they'd have to register all their members and their dues and their financial report to the state. That law is still on the books. The Masons were able to, in conjunction with the Knights of Columbus, to have themselves exempted for it, and yet it was a front for Masonry. And they got around it. The other thing was the Depression, which did it in.
I can remember reading your book that, first of all, it's very interesting that the Scottish Rite of the Southern Jurisdiction, their official magazine is called The New Age. Now, maybe the name changed, but certainly from 1920 to maybe very recently it was called The New Age. I recall that during the 1950s, they said we have much more to fear from the Catholics than from the Soviets. Now, this is really striking because the 1950s was the big scare, you know, the House Committee on Un-American Activities and so forth. Do you think this is a fair view, that the Masons were very much afraid of this becoming a Catholic country, of having a Catholic president and so on?
Oh, clearly. They many quotations in the book about opposing anything Catholic. I think the first major candidate they attacked, well, of course, Al Smith. They were against Al Smith. In
the 1920s. 1920s. Governor of New York.
Governor of New York. And the thing about Al Smith, people forget, but Jack Kennedy, or actually John... his campaign manager from Connecticut, whose last name escapes me, did a study and showed there was such a thing as a Catholic vote, because in the two preceding elections for president, prior to Al Smith, the Republicans really wiped them out. But Al Smith got almost twice the number of votes as the two preceding Democratic candidates. So that proved there was such a thing as a Catholic vote. And Jack Kennedy rode into the White House on such a vote. So that there's another figure in the book, I think, between 1955 and 1960, 56% of the total growth in the United States was in the Catholic sector. And right after that is when we had Vatican II and the whole dissipation of the church. At that time, too, you may recall, nothing to do with Masonry particularly, but the American Management Association put out a study showing the Catholic Church was the best organized and efficient organization in the world over General Motors or any other group. And with that, it went down the tubes, and the Catholic population declined, and the rate of growth is just infinitesimal since that time.
I'd like to get back to that question, but
I would like to respond to your question about attacks on the Catholic Church. If you, for example, look at the Italian Revolution, Garibaldi was a Mason. They bitterly persecuted the Catholic Church and hated it with great intensity. The French Revolution, to a great extent, was a Masonic enterprise, even though during the course of the Revolution itself, the general lodges were suppressed. Nevertheless, the ones who ran the government, who came to power, they were Masons, and their supreme goal was the utter ruination of everything Catholic, to destroy. And they did ruthlessly and brutally murder countless priests and nuns and lay people. There was one that even had a program for the depopulation of France, where they conceived of the possibility of solving unemployment by killing 1/3 of the French population.
It's incredible. You know, let's turn our gaze onto the United States. You kind of alluded to my earlier question I have in mind. There's a general perception amongst some who are fearful of Masonry that would say, well, yes, European Masonry is somewhat malignant. But certainly that's not the case in the United States. Let's turn our gaze in the United States in the 19th century.
Well, that's why I started to say, and I didn't articulate it well, was that their known opponent in Europe was the Roman Catholic Church. In the United States, it was general Christianity, but they knew that the Protestant and the Catholic, you had a division right there. So they got Protestants in the United States, by and large, to work up this hatred against the Catholic Church. And the No More Nothing movement, one of the famous riots was the Philadelphia riots of 1840, something like 1846, 48, where actually during that riot they lined up a cannon in front of the Catholic Church, St. Philip's, and fired the cannon right into the front door of the church. And they insisted they had to investigate churches because they were hiding weapons in the basement of the churches. A famous columnist, a well-known columnist, who was writing well into the 60s, I believe, Lowell Mellett, did a piece in The Nation magazine in which he supported that idea. He was talking about the Klan, and he was the one who talked about there wasn't much mileage among the blacks or the Jews. The mileage was in the hatred of the Catholic Church. And he indeed endorsed it. Here's a major columnist. He endorsed that idea of not attacking the Masons for what they were doing in the Catholic Church, but they were right. We should go into the basements of every church in the United States and see if they have guns.
There's an idea that they were circulating that they were training an armed force to take over this country militarily, you know, under the Pope's command. You're watching What Catholics Believe. We're discussing Freemasonry. Mr. Fisher, the main point I'd like to get to is the profound social change which took place in the United States during the 1930s and 40s, and we feel its effect today, namely the whole church-state question. You dealt with the fact in your book that on 3 separate occasions, at least, the United States Supreme Court declared that the United States is a Christian nation, all right? During the 19th century, it was not unusual for the federal government to give money to churches, even the Catholic Church, to help establish schools, to help establish missions. This was not unusual. Prayer in school was almost a norm. Bible reading was the norm. Then all of this changed. Perhaps you could just tell us a little about the religious spirit in this country in the 19th century, and then get us into the 1930s with Hugo Black and Franklin Roosevelt and the court-packing scheme.
Well, the Christian religion in this country was accepted as being the established church. And when they say that when the Constitution was adopted, a wall was erected separating church and state, was totally wrong. Immediately after the First Amendment was approved, one of the first acts they did was appointed chaplains to the Congress, the House and the Senate. James Madison, whom they give credit for writing the First Amendment, which he did not, was in the Congress. He was shown on the quorum calls as being present. He did not object to it. He later admitted he was present when this happened. But almost immediately afterward, there was three major acts passed by Congress to give funding to the Indians, to convert the heathen Indians, I think it was worded, to Christianity. There was another legislation which was prior to the Congress being established. It was the Continental Congress we're operating under. But in the new Congress, the Northwest Ordinance provided funds shall be provided for schools to teach morality, because you just can't operate a government without having sound moral principles based on Christianity. And President proclamations about Thanksgiving have gone all through the history of our country. George Washington's farewell address said, we fool ourselves if we think we can have morality without religion. You had inaugural addresses of the presidents, almost without exception, with one exception would be Thomas Jefferson, mentioned Almighty God, or Jesus 3 times. Christianity was indicated by the presidents in their inaugural addresses as being the religion of the United States. Abraham Lincoln was the one, William Henry Harrison, John Adams, all mentioned, but all of them mentioned Almighty and so forth. So Christianity was generally pervaded the country, and certainly not the Catholic religion, but largely general Protestantism was effective. One of the famous jurists was Justice Story, appointed to the Supreme Court by Mr. Madison. And he clearly said that Christianity is what's intended to be protected by the First Amendment. So he had a whole range of history behind this being a Christian nation. Then in the 1940, the court became dominated by Freemasons in ratios of 8 to 1, 5 to 4 to 8 to 1, up through 1941 through 1971, a 30-year period when the Masons sat on the court.
Why don't you explain to us their attitude toward education? I understand that they couldn't stand the idea of giving tuition credits to Catholics so they could attend parochial schools, and they wanted to make sure that public education, in their words, was non-sectarian and was devoid of any relationship to God or religion.
Well, you see, up until pretty much the GI Bill of Rights following World War II, actually during 1944 it passed, education was a state matter. The federal government got into it with the GI Bill of Rights. And when the GI Bill of Rights was on the floor of the House, 85% of both the House and the Senate are lawyers. Not one raised the question about this being contrary to the Constitution. Indeed, Senator Morse, Wayne Morse of a western state, Oregon? Oregon, yes, right. He was dean of the law school of Oregon, law school. He did not raise a question. The specific question was asked on the House floor, well, supposing one of these returning veterans wants to attend a seminary, a religious seminary, was that covered by the legislation before us? He said, yes, as long as the seminary is legitimate, not a fly-by-night organization. So that legislation passed, and indeed returning veterans did go to seminaries, became priests and ministers and rabbis. The following year, other legislation came to the floor, and it was designed along the lines of the GI Bill. Now, state constitutions have prohibitions on giving any aid to parochial school, religious institutions. The GI Bill allowed for the Administrator of Veterans Affairs to override that and authorize it through the federal government so the money would go to them. So many kids went to Catholic schools and seminaries. The second legislation for elementary and secondary students originally came in for public school students only. Then 2 senators introduced a companion bill to include Catholic and other religious schools involved in it. This is what the Masons got upset about. They are for public education. Indeed, they helped found public education in the United States, but they didn't want any aid to go to Catholic schools. The legislation was somewhat in limbo, And Justice Black, a sitting justice, a Mason, on the court in 1945.
Violently anti-Catholic, too.
Oh, militant.
And a Ku Klux Klan member, formerly.
And was a Ku Klux member, not anti, he was a lifetime member, you're right. Man received a Pulitzer Prize for revealing that about Justice Black. Justice Black left the country, and when he came back, he didn't deny he'd been a Klansman or didn't say anything about the Klan. He immediately attacked the religious bigotry in the country who were trying to stir up religious animosity. And the reason I mention that is because as recently as last June, the court handed down an opinion in which they were concerned about religious animosity endangering the country should you give any aid to parochial schools. There is no record of religious animosity except for the Masonic-dominated Know-Nothing, Ku Klux Klan, APA movements. There has been clear animosity when you had open housing and things like that. The riots did indeed break out, but the court never concerned us. It's only this religious aspect, and what they're talking about is the Catholic school system because it's the largest, but any religious school system, because the only religion Masonry wants is their own religion. So that Justice Black sent a letter to Lister Hill, and Lister Hill was the senator who succeeded Black in Alabama when Black went to the Supreme Court, for which he was unqualified. But he sent this letter urging him to get in touch with the Masons because the Masons are opposing the bill. Well, the Masons were really not opposing the bill generally because they want public school to flourish. They were opposing that portion of the bill which would have also aided parochial schools, Catholic parochial schools, Jewish, Lutheran, whatever, religious parochial schools. That's what they strongly opposed. And so here's a sitting justice lobbying a senator. Now, I guess a justice is a citizen like anybody else, but he not only wrote to his own senator, he also wrote to the head of the Masonry, the Scottish Rite Masonry in Washington, and to the Scottish Rite Masonry in Alabama, urging them to look carefully at this bill.
Let's talk about some of the other things that happened. In 1922, I understand, the state of Oregon passed a law which made it compulsory for every child to attend a state school. Isn't that the case?
That's right.
Who was responsible for that law?
The Masons. The Masons pushed it through. In fact, they tried to push one through within the last couple of years, but it was destroyed on its prima facie because there had been this somebody versus Society Sisters, I forget the exact title of it. That was the key decision, where it says that the basic thrust of the court's opinion then was the child does not belong to the state. He belongs to the parents, and they could educate that child in whatever manner they want.
How is this? Here we have a secret society, which is what it is, an ancient secret society, which has such power that presidents of the United States to curry favor join it, that they have a tremendous influence over the Supreme Court, they have a tremendous impact on Congress, and yet there's nothing about it in the newspapers. There's no investigation into the influence of this secret society. How do you explain that?
They have 4 million members, too.
It's got 4 million members. They're very prominent. You've mentioned some of the prominent ones. One you missed was Ronald Reagan came in 1988.
Is it because of their power?
It's done because of their power, because a lot of the press are members of the of Masonry. And it's always put off aside, oh, it's the kook fringe talking about secret societies and conspiracies. Clearly, it is a conspiratorial organization. The fact that it has secrets and these terrible oaths that you get your throat cut across, your bowels torn from out if you violate any secret that they learn in the lodge door or otherwise within Masonry. So even these good and decent men, one of the presidents of the Philippines, the grand commander of Scottish Rite Masonry reported in the New Age magazine that, I think it was Manuel Quezon, I wouldn't be held to that, but it's either he or another one, would not join the 33rd degree of Masonry because he's afraid he would have to do something against his government, which he was not prepared to do. So these people, when you get up to the 30th degree, you're pretty well aware of what's happening.
What's going on.
Just very briefly before we have to go, that particular Supreme Court was also responsible for all kinds of laws, you know, breaking the anti-blasphemy concepts.
Oh, yeah. It changed the whole orientation, that's kind of the whole Christian orientation that's kind of just destroyed.
As a result of Masonry.
By Masonry.
Right.
We've been watching what Catholics believe. We've